I broke up with my girlfriend because of the Barbie movie. A few days ago, I watched Barbie with my girlfriend. And in Barbie and Ken's seemingly trivial, fantastical world, I found a life-altering realization that compelled me to end a relationship that had spanned 2 years of my life. It wasn't an easy decision to make. She was my rock. Those first few months leading up to us being together was like a delicate dance as she was still healing from a past relationship. She was so unsure about being with me, probably for fear of repeating past mistakes. But she took the chance, and we grew together slowly. She even stopped talking to her ex after a year or so since they had been good friends, regardless of the relationship they had. But circumstances brought them back in contact when his mother was hospitalized. She was too afraid to tell me, scared it might upset me. And while I know there was no infidelity involved, the lack of communication hurt me. She immediately stopped speaking to him from that moment over a year ago and hasn't spoken to him since. As if that wasn't enough, 2 months after that incident her parents were actively pushing her into talks of marriage with a guy they favored. We had an understanding that she would tell me everything and keep her interactions with this guy to a bare minimum and keep it as dry as possible. But when I accidentally saw a 2-month-long snap streak with him on her phone, the old wounds were reopened. She thought she had already told me, but we both soon realized that she had completely forgotten about it. I know snap streaks seem like such a trivial issue, but in the grand scheme of things, it was pretty massive, considering the trials and tribulations we've both been through. I was left in a strange place, feeling as if I was constantly in the shadows of other men in her life, waiting for some level of openness that never really came. But through all of this, she remained my rock, my support. She was there for me during the grueling days of university, the job search, and everything else life threw at me. She was there for my family, always kind, always ready to help. Watching the Barbie movie was supposed to be an escape from reality, but it turned out to be the opposite. In Ken, I saw myself. He existed to serve Barbie. Without her, he felt empty and devoid of purpose. But throughout the movie, and after some unfortunate patriarchy, Barbie helps Ken discover his own worth and realizes he is not defined by Barbie, but rather, he is enough just being himself. And believe it or not, this realization shook me. I had been clinging to the comfort and support she provided, blind to the mounting issues. But I had to face the truth. I was enough. My worth wasn't tied to her, my happiness wasn't dependent on her validation. She is a wonderful person, truly, but we had issues that we couldn't resolve, issues that were hurting us both. And all I am Ryan Gosling jokes aside, I am like Ken, still searching for my purpose, my calling. But I know that I am enough. I'm not sure where I'll end up, but I have faith in the journey. She deserves the same chance to find her own way without the weight of my expectations or the shadows of her past. So, here I am, a guy who realized his worth after watching a Barbie movie. It's strange how life lessons can come from the most unexpected places. It's been a challenging period, but I'm grateful for the insight. I'm ready to face the world, as me, just me. I am enough. I just found out my girlfriend is a part of a cult with her rich elite family. Hey folks, I'm Mark and I've been with my girlfriend, Amy, for about 3 years now. I gotta share this because it's eating me up inside. So, I've been seeing Amy for about 3 years now. We first bumped into each other at some local event. She was passing out sandwiches and I was stuck with trash duty. Between jokes about soggy bread and trash bags, we pretty much hit it off instantly. Classic rock and a shared love for old TV shows got us talking, and before I knew it, we were a thing. But here's where it gets weird. In these past 3 years, while she's become buddies with my mates and even my grouchy cat, Mr. Whiskers, I've never once met her family. I mean, come on, we're in the same town and everything. At first, I thought maybe they're just super private or something. But years go by, and still nothing. Every time I'd bring it up, she'd dodge the topic or come up with some weird excuse. I've always found it odd. Now, let's fast forward to last Christmas. I was thinking, alright, this is my shot. I'll get to meet the family. I suggested we hang at her place, maybe have a quiet dinner. She said yes, and man, was I stoked. But when we rolled up to her parents' house, it wasn't just any regular house. It was massive, like, mansion big. Looked super old too. Gave me vibes of those big houses from old movies. And if that wasn't surprising enough, she told me her folks had some emergency and had bailed out of town. Just my luck, right? We went in and tried to have a normal evening, but the silence of that house was kinda eerie. Despite the circumstances, we made the most of the night, grabbed some supper down the street, watched a movie, and fell asleep in what seemed to be her childhood room. Later that night, she was asleep and I was trying to find the kitchen for some water, when I stumbled upon a faint sound. Like whispering. It was coming from a door down one of the hallways. So there I was, in the middle of this old, big house, and the only noise was this weird whispering. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tiptoed closer. The closer I got, the clearer the whispers became, but it was in some weird language I couldn't understand. My heart's racing by now, right? I noticed a soft light seeping out from under the door. Man, I thought of turning back, but then what kind of story would that be? I crouched down and peeked through the keyhole. Now, you won't believe what I saw. There was a group of people inside, all wearing these dark cloaks, seated in a circle, mumbling that weird chant. I couldn't see their faces. The room was lit with candles, and in the middle of them was some kind of ornate-looking bowl. I freaked the F out. Like, straight-up horror movie stuff right there. I backed away as quietly as I could and pretty much sprinted back to bed. I tried to act cool, not wake Amy, and acted like nothing happened. Morning came, and I had to ask. So, Amy, I said, what's up with the room down the hall? The one with the chanting? She looked at me kinda funny and then laughed it off, saying it was probably just some old junk and that the house makes weird noises all the time. But here's the thing, houses don't chant. I tried to play it cool for the rest of our stay. But deep down, I was rattled. The mystery of her family, this big old mansion, and now a cloak-wearing chanting group? It felt like I'd walked straight into an episode of The Twilight Zone. It honestly didn't even feel like real life. Days turned into weeks, and I couldn't shake off that eerie feeling. Every time I looked at Amy, a million questions raced through my mind. I tried to talk about it with some buddies over beers, but no one had any solid advice. Maybe it's a family tradition or some weird club? One friend guessed. Or maybe you just had too much to drink? Laughed another. Helpful, right? But here's where it gets crazier. I was over at Amy's apartment one evening, and she went out to grab some food. I decided to snoop around a bit. Hey, don't judge me, curiosity got the best of me. I needed answers. Anyway, I stumbled upon a drawer in her room. And what did I find? One of those dark cloaks, exactly like I'd seen at the mansion. Right there, my heart sank in my stomach. I felt nauseous. It wasn't just some random group at the house, Amy was part of it. The rest of that evening felt like I was in a fog. When she returned with the food, we tried to settle into a normal evening vibe. She grabbed some Chinese takeout, my favorite orange chicken and her go-to shrimp fried rice. But every bite I took tasted bland, even the TV show we had playing in the background, some comedy rerun we've watched a million times before, just sounded like mindless noise. My thoughts were consumed by that cloak, the room, and the strange whispers. At one point, she tried making small talk, probably sensing my distraction. But every attempt to engage in casual conversation felt strained, superficial. Finally, after what felt like hours, I couldn't handle the weight of my curiosity and concern. I turned off the TV, took a moment to gather my thoughts and finally confronted her about the cloak in the drawer. Her reaction was instant. Her face was drained of color. For a moment, her eyes darted around, as if looking for an escape or an explanation. It was like she'd been caught in a lie she never expected to confront. Then she sighed, took a shaky breath and looked at me, eyes clouded with emotion. She then told me there was something she needed to get off her chest. She went on to explain that it's a family tradition, some old ritual they've been practicing for generations. She kept telling me that it was harmless and just a way to connect with their roots. And she'd kept it a secret because she didn't want me to think they were weird or get freaked out. But it all felt off, like she rehearsed what she'd say if she ever got caught. Man, it's so twisted. I mean, I genuinely love Amy. The laughs, the memories, the late night talks. But now? There's this shadow over everything. That cloak, it's like it's burned into my brain. Every time she smiles, every time she talks, behind all that I just see her wearing it, in that dimly lit room, surrounded by those chanting voices. It feels like there's this other side of her I never knew. And even though she acts like everything's normal, it's hard. I can't shake the feeling off. Like, is this just some quirky family thing or is there more to the story? It's driving me nuts, to be honest. What would you all do? Do I just go with it or trust my gut that there's more she's not saying? What do you guys think? I thought I had lost my best friend. Turns out she faked her death to get with my husband. I had lost everything when I lost Renee. We had met as children at only 5 years old. We have had over 2 decades together, through thick and thin. She gave the most wonderful speech at my wedding. I was an only child, but Renee is my sister in the truest sense. When I got the news of the accident, I was inconsolable, just totally beside myself. Until I realized the truth. I'm not sure if knowing she was gone forever is worse than knowing what I know now about her. Losing her meant losing everything, but after everything we've been through now, it feels like half of my life is a lie. As kids, we joked around a lot. We especially enjoyed playing pranks. Not only on each other but on everyone we knew. Our parents hated them, but we were just having fun. Over time I grew accustomed to her antics and I could smell a fresh prank brewing from a mile away, especially if I was the target. There are certain holes in things. Missing puzzle pieces. People think that lies are added information you can look at and understand. But lies and pranks are about what is missing from the picture. In the empty space, I could form a picture of Renee and what she intended. Once, at theater camp, she had faked being sick so she could sneak away. She was supposed to be in her cabin with the flu while she was actually out moving furniture around in the faculty cabin. I only called her out because there were no tissues on her bedside table. She had medicine but none of it was taken. Missing puzzle pieces. A month after her passing, I found the first missing piece. I was helping her mother clean out and sort old keepsakes. We were both trying to move on and hoped putting things away would help. We had some wine, opened up a few boxes, and began to conclude Renee's life by remembering her. I sobered up immediately when I saw it. Her calendar. It was a monthly whiteboard. The plans from the month of her passing were still marked in black dry erase. Except, the few weeks before her passing were completely empty. You have to understand that Renee is a busy woman. She was not one to leave a single weekend unadorned with visits to friends or family. She marked her previous weeks nearly full, and then nothing. It was just the kind of Renee-shaped hole I knew from so many years together. But this wasn't a prank. She'd never do something so hurtful. Our pranks were silly and fun and not a tear was ever shed. I stared at the calendar and said nothing to her mother. I took a mental note of the last few appointments to try and find a pattern. I must have looked rather grim, but I passed it off as grief. The only thing I felt was suspicion. Renee had made 3 visits somewhat regularly. Dry cleaners, movie night, and trips to the grocery store. I looked at showtimes for past films and they seemed to coincide with movies I knew she had seen. I was even with her for one of them. Trips to the grocery store were harder to verify. I had to convince some poor kid working the night shift that I had something stolen from my car. I asked to take a look at the security footage, and while he helped someone else, I quickly scanned for Renee at the time she had listed on her calendar. Sure enough, I was able to find her. Always at night, and always buying a great many things. I couldn't tell anything specific from the footage, but her cart was always full when she left. This wasn't strange on its own, but she took home a full cart 3 times a week for her small apartment. Then, nothing. I drove straight to the laundromat with more questions than answers. I called my husband along the way. It seemed from the way he spoke that he was worried about me. Who could blame me for losing my head after losing Renee? He told me to call off the search for more, to just come home and deal with my loss. I reassured him that I would, just after checking on Renee's last whereabouts. There was really only one laundromat in town. I knew Renee had mentioned them before. I explained a version of my situation, trying to hunt down anything related to the last week of my best friend. The manager pulled up their digital records and explained Renee had not been there for months. I thanked them and left rather disheartened. I felt that maybe this was all nothing, and I really was losing it. I drove home to the arms of my loving husband, Michael. He could tell I was rather distraught, and I told him about the groceries and the laundromat and just how the missing chunks of Renee were adding up. He grew silent, and at the time I thought he was just really worried for me. He told me I was looking into things too closely, and I was hurting myself with grief. He said I needed a little time away, and suggested a little vacation, a weekend away with him to process my thoughts. It admittedly sounded a lot better than how I felt at that moment, and I agreed. We started packing our bags that evening, planning to leave the moment Michael returned from work. I was working from home at the time, and my duties were easy enough. I tried to focus on work that day, but the missing pieces were eating at me. I tried to occupy myself by updating my own calendar, wondering if I suddenly disappeared who might look over my recent tasks. I wasn't as dutiful in scheduling as Renee, but I had always noted items for work for both myself and my husband. I checked some recent milestones off my list, and I noticed Michael had some work projects he was busy with. I was hoping for his sake that he'd have enough time to finish his projects before our vacation. He was always working late hours, but he could usually plan those late nights in advance. Tonight was supposed to be a late night project again, some tech administration thing I didn't care to grasp. But then I was able to connect something together. There in my schedule were all the late nights my husband completed in the past few months, and the ones from last month all coincided with Renee's trips to the laundromat. I called Michael. Over and over I called and he did not answer. My mind was in such a panic that I felt drunk. I paced our house, phone ringing again and again before his voicemail took over. I thought back on how Michael was acting in those days and I wasn't sure if I was projecting, but I could sense just the whisper of one of Renee's schemes again. Missing pieces finally coming together. Then I noticed something else was missing, my husband's things that he had packed. All his luggage was gone from the neat pile we'd arranged the night before. I tore open drawers and cabinets to find he'd also taken his passport and laptop. I was hyperventilating as I again looked at my phone, over 80 outgoing unanswered calls to Michael. It was starting to get dark outside. I navigated to my Find My Phone app and logged out. I knew a good deal of Michael's passwords and soon I was able to log into his account with his credentials. I activated the GPS function and saw he was on the outskirts of town. Or, at least his phone was. Hurrying to my car, I placed the phone in the cradle and sped into the night towards the small GPS ping at the edge of town, near the highway. I screamed and cried as I went, and for the first time, I wished that Renee had just stayed dead. As I turned the corner of a grove of trees into an industrial parking lot, I saw them. My husband was holding my completely alive best friend by the hips. They were smiling, at least until my headlights stopped directly on them and the pickup truck they were standing by. They both seemed to recognize my car and panic, quickly moving to the cab of the truck and driving out of the parking lot. I mumbled the license plate to myself in shock as I called the police. The last I ever saw of them was the piles of grocery bags stacked and tied down in the back of the truck. Police found them near the border, with enough supplies to start a new life. Over the next few weeks, it was my turn to ignore their calls. Renee had been taken in for insurance fraud, and the man I thought I loved had been her accomplice. I missed all the pieces, but I finally put them all together. How did you find out that someone close to you was secretly a murderer? Last month someone new came to our little town. There are always people coming in and out. Visitors and tourists. We only have a few dozen people here, just a farm town that appeared near the gas station along the highway. The land is inexpensive, it's why my parents moved here. It's where I grew up. In my years living here, I learned to smell trouble when it blew into town. Drunks, vagrants, or worse. Some people only cause trouble wherever they go. Other people are running from trouble they can't shake. Our town is quiet, and I like it like that. Too quiet to have some trouble coming through. The woman who went by Kate reeked of trouble. I try to be nice to the newcomers, they're few and far between. We don't have someone new in the community save a few births now and then. So I thought I'd try and welcome her. She had purchased an old farmhouse near the highway down a long dirt road. The old place was rotting, not sure why anyone would want to live there. 2 stories, but old wood on overgrown land. We don't have many options, but there are certainly better options than that. Walter was the name of the last man to live there, but he passed away nearly a decade ago. He'd been a quiet and solitary man. I'd only ever see him on Sunday Mass or when he was at the general store. I'm not sure if I ever said 2 words to him. When I met Kate, it was at that old house, so big and so old for just one woman from the city. The first sign of trouble. I had brought peach cobbler, my specialty. They were almost out of season, and I thought it would be a nice welcome to the neighborhood. When she answered, she didn't look happy, barely said hello. She told me to just leave the cobbler at the door and closed it before I could warn her about the ants and flies around these rural farms. I just stood there for a moment. I don't know where you're from, but where I live we don't knock, we just enter. We all know each other, it's just how we are. I'm not saying it was right, just that I wasn't thinking much about it at the time. I opened the door, trying to get that cobbler inside. I barely had it open before she shrieked at me, which I suppose I deserved. Where she was shrieking from was odd, though. She was standing in the entryway, waist deep in the floorboards. Some huge chunk of the floor was missing, splintered wood was scattered around the room. She looked like she was renovating with a chainsaw. Naturally, I apologized profusely and told her I'd leave the cobbler outside. I'm sure some critter made quick work of it. Needless to say, we'd gotten off to a rocky start. As I walked home, I couldn't help but wonder what she was doing tearing the old bones of that house apart. That thing was liable to collapse on her. I tried not to dwell on it. Whatever trouble she was cooking up in there could stay inside for all I cared. I knew any more prying from me and she might explode. Live and let live, as they say. Unfortunately, her trouble started leaking out all over town. Next I saw her, she was at Sunday Mass. I had noticed her sat near the back, looking somewhat bored. Not that I blame her, it's not exactly a blockbuster in the church. I was planning on ignoring her, but after service I found her talking to my husband while I was making my rounds saying hello. You should understand, that my husband James is a simple man. I wouldn't expect him to know the smell of trouble. She was flirting with him, but only just. Her look turned horribly sour when I walked close enough for James to introduce me. They'd been talking about some handyman work. James is a carpenter, dabbling in plumbing and gardening. Resourceful man, it's why I love him. He later told me Kate has some kind of project she's been working on. I told him he should probably stay away, knowing the trouble that woman had around her. James is a kind soul, too kind to turn down a request for help. Especially since she was going to pay well, if only on credit. Maybe I let him go there because I thought he could help clean up her act. It only got worse. Not 2 weeks afterward, James had been helping her out quite a bit. I knew my husband was too simple of a man for infidelity, but I didn't trust that woman. He didn't know what she was planning down there, but he was helping her tear up the place. He thought she was just making room for new flooring and walls, but she never started to put anything new inside. Just punching holes and tearing the place apart. One afternoon, James was supposed to be helping her with more flooring. Kate was going to be out, and it was just him there. I decided to bring my husband some sandwiches and have a look around myself. The place was a war zone. The floor looked like Swiss cheese and there was fresh dirt in various piles inside and out. Some walls were knocked clean through, it felt like the place might fall right over. James was just happy for some work and assured me it was safe. He took a lunch break while I took a look around. The whole place had the bare minimum required for shelter. The roof looked good, and the exterior walls were holding on just fine. I could tell from the way the holes in the structure appeared that Kate was looking for something. Like a dog digging for a lost bone. I went up the rickety stairs to the master bedroom. Kate had very few possessions, a single wardrobe with a handful of outfits. She had a few papers scattered on a writing desk in the corner. I know I told you I wasn't going to pry, but I wanted to find out just how much trouble we were dealing with now that my husband was wrapped up into it. Some of the papers were blueprints, others seemed like the property deed and title to that house and land. I scanned over the documents, they all had old man Walter's name on them. Walter didn't have anyone to leave the house to, so it passed to the state on his death. Odd that there was no mention of Kate to be seen. I saw the top of one older document, a last will and testament. Walter had left that place to his son Henry and mentioned gold bars stored inside. I knew then what she was looking for. I heard the front door open, and my husband's voice. He probably just told Kate I was up here. I quickly searched the desk for more information, and I found an obituary. It was the old man's son, from the will. Kate entered just as I was about to open the door to leave. I looked rather suspicious, I'm sure. I told her she'd better be careful knocking down so many walls, and I tried to hide that I'd been snooping. She must have bought it, I was able to leave without incident. Later that night I told James what I found, and how it seemed. He told me about some stories she had shared of her late husband Henry, and it all started to piece together. I stayed up late searching different county websites for Henry and Walter, before finding their obituaries listed in public records. That's when I saw the warrant for the arrest of Henry's wife and primary suspect in his murder, Kathleen. I called the police that evening, and I didn't sleep at all after. I just wanted her out of our town, she was dangerous. I drove in the morning to the old house to see what had happened. Patrol cars were there and the building had been roped off. She had escaped town, probably left after I spooked her. I didn't tell them about the gold. Maybe she found it and took it with her, or maybe it's still in the house. Maybe it doesn't exist at all. At any rate, it's all far too much trouble. How any long married couple. We don't go on dates as often as we used to, and we each had our own activities, like Martin playing golf every Tuesday and Saturday while I did volunteer work several days a week. We still shared a bed, but lovemaking had become rare and I couldn't even remember when was the last time we did it. No matter how boring things had become, I was confident we were going to make it to the end. But then fate wouldn't let me have my way. One time, while Martin was taking a shower, his phone lit up, and out of reflex, I peeked. It was a notification from an app, and upon closer look, I realized it was a dating app. I couldn't believe that he was into these things. Like, was he planning to get rid of me, or was this just some form of recreation that he badly needed? I might be boring the hell out of him, but I wasn't going to let anyone steal him away from me. And so I created an account on the same app and randomly searched for an attractive woman on the internet. I came across this beautiful brunette who was a dentist in Michigan. She was young, she was hot, and she was into golf. Perfect. I used her photos and uploaded them to my profile, and from then on, I became Stella. Things went well according to my plan. Martin and Stella became a match. And so, I started another love story with Martin. He was extra sweet to Stella, messaging her first thing in the morning and sending her more messages all throughout the day to make sure that she had eaten on time, or just to remind her to take her vitamins and supplements. They usually talked about golf, but on some days, the conversations would turn intimate, and they would exchange explicit messages. Of course, Stella didn't know what to say whenever Martin would ask for explicit photos, but she always managed to find a way out. She also never answered his calls and would always reason that she wasn't comfortable yet to talk to him verbally because, well, he was married. Martin promised to be patient and wait for the time when she would be ready to bring their relationship to another level. But even if he was talking to my alter ego, I still felt jealous because he was obviously falling for Stella, and this made me hate the real owner of Stella's face. One night, in the middle of our chat, I excused myself and went inside the bathroom. Martin was in his study where he would chat with Stella every night, so I thought it was safe to leave my laptop open. My sister then called me on the phone while I was relieving myself, and our hi hellos turned into a 20-minute conversation before we hung up. To my shock, Martin was standing right in front of my laptop when I went the mess. It turned out that I was the one who made their love story possible.